Quotation from myself, segment 58, quotation number 726. It is so hard for any man to finally make peace with himself that even if this peace is but a creature of the illusion, one should be compassionate enough not to point this out to such a man. For since this, with such a difficulty obtained peace, will eventually be broken by the forces of the inner contradictions anyway, why to hasten it? To live in a fool's paradise or in a wise man's hell, shouldn't everyone be allowed to make choice for himself? 727. The creation of a genuine work of art is akin to an act of sacrificing, and the artist is both the one who sacrifices and who is sacrificed. In this act of creation as a sacrifice, the artist offers his blood and sweat, his joys and sorrow, his pain and pleasure, his despair and ecstasy. And the God to whom all this is offered is his public, the readers, the listeners, the viewers. The price of the great art, the art that moves all by penetrating and touching their innermost being, is the great pain of an artist, and nothing less, even the great talent, would suffice. The greatest work of his art, the greatest work of his life, Concierto de Aranjuez, was created by Spanish composer Joaquin Rodrigo when he was experiencing possibly the greatest pain of his life. His first child had been just lost in a childbirth, and his wife was herself within a hairbreadth of death. No one who hears this magnificent concerto can remain unmoved by its heart-piercing sadness. But was this immortal music worth the tragedy it was produced by? The artists, of course, have no monopoly in pain and suffering. Neither do they, contrary to popular mythology, experience them more acutely than the rest of us. But given the universality of tragedy in human existence, we all have to deal with it somehow. And the artists do it by creating art. The pain has to be explained, to be endured, and to sustain the hope that all is not in vain. 728. There is no light without burning, and therefore destroying, however gradually, what is the source of the light. 729. It is not so much the ability to discern the truth as the courage to acknowledge it that separates the enlightened from the benighted. 730. Yet another definition of man, the only animal that lives knowing it must die. 731. Since finally I am absolutely certain that life shortchanged me, and 85 one can hardly be mistaken, at least about this, I now look forward to death as the only opportunity left to me to get even with those who are favored by fortune much more than I. 732. The ordinary unhappiness comes from trying to be what one is not. The real tragedy from the struggle to be what one is. 733. The blind know how to listen, the deaf how to see. 734. The poet's task is to articulate the reader's innermost thoughts and feelings, and he accomplishes this by articulating his own. 735. The egoism of the successful people is different both in its nature and its origins from that of the unsuccessful ones. For in the first is the principal cause of their success, in the second, one of the reaction to persistent failures. The successful people tend to be naturally, that is unintentionally, self-centered, for the single-minded dedication they unfailingly exhibit, and which is obviously necessary for the success, makes them oblivious or indifferent to all but those who could either help or hinder their progress. The egoism of the unsuccessful people is, on the other hand, of an entirely different nature, for they are often inclined to attribute their numerous failures to paying too much attention to the welfare of the others and not enough to their own. Consequently, they are resolved in their future action to discard as the main impediment to their success any such considerations. Therefore, their egoism is not natural, but intentional, and depending on fluctuation of their fortune, can either increase or decrease. 736. Outwardly, the poor and the powerless find solace in being cynically passive, and the rich and powerful justify their position by being enthusiastically confident and forward-looking. Inwardly, however, they seem to trade places. The first, in fact, are incurably optimistic, for all they hope to gain depends on a better future, while the second can't help but to be apprehensive about the future, where, having already all that could be wished and more in the present, they had nothing to gain and everything to lose. 737. Thou shalt not use thy superior knowledge as a bludgeon to prevail and subdued, but as a torch to raise up and enlightened. 738. Thou shalt not use the backs of others as a ladder rings to climb higher, but as an opportunity to relieve them of their burden by offering your back to carry it. 739. In our post-Darwinian world, it is taken for granted that for any living organism to survive, it must adapt to the changing environment. Yet man reversed this law by remaining the same and changing the environment to suit himself. By being flexible and adaptable, one can survive, but in the process become someone else. By being inflexible and refusing to adapt, one can survive but remaining oneself. The first survives as a biological organism, the second as a species. The life of individuals and the history of the group offer us numerous examples of both and tell us that either is possible. 740. Be aware of the people with big ideas, because it is you who is going to pay for their realization. 741. The rationalization of any work process or activity, be it in the industrial production, domestic chores, or some personal undertaking, has at its rationale and byproduct the spending of less time on doing it than before. If thus saved time can be employed in doing something else, then such rationalization is rational. On the other hand, if the time saved becomes the time on our hands, with nothing else to do with it, then the rationalization is irrational. So if you see somebody spending too much time on doing something, do not rush to advise him how to save time, but think first if he will have anything to do with the time saved. Since if he will not, instead of doing him a favor, you can actually cause harm. The rationalization is good. The rationalization is for the good of man, not man for the good of the rationalization. 742. Oh, what a thankless and ultimately futile task the older man is condemned to perform for the rest of his life, to desperately try to recover the years wasted when he was young. 743. The ideas one acquires by borrowing through the mountains of books, no matter how good and wise they are like a black hole dust a miner is covered with when digging it up. Both are easily washed away. As the second with water, so is the first with time. Only those ideas which are produced by our own thinking, out of our own experience, in their due time and no sooner, become the integral part of our being and stay with us for as long as we live. 744. It is a regrettable but undeniable fact of life that the majority of people cannot either think for themselves or form their thoughts into clear opinions or ideas, and therefore have to repeat as clichés what has been said by the few who are distinguished from the rest, most of all by their ability to articulate their own sentiments and then to believe in them as objective and irrefutable truth. That is why this majority cannot have any strong ideology and can be easily persuaded to exchange one set of clichés for another. The recently reprogrammed former members of religious cults is one of the most vivid manifestations of this phenomenon and can serve as a universal metaphor of it. Their cure is as illusory and superficial as it is short-lived. They just exchange their former guru's set of clichés for that of their present therapist, and can be as quickly and as easily persuaded by the next guru to make yet another switch. For all throughout the process they remain what they were before, the wearer of somebody else's clothes. 745. Where women and men begin looking forward to sex as primarily a source of pleasure instead of the opportunity to prove their attractiveness and desirability in case of women, and their sexual prowess in case of men, the relationship between the sexes will become more simple and much more satisfying.